Welcome to the University of Denver's Oral History. Our series begins in the mid-1980s when DU was on the brink of bankruptcy and continues to 2014 with the university a regional academic leader and poised for national prominence. The interviews in this series present a panorama of progress against steep odds, stories told by men and women who were personally involved in saving the university and undertaking an extraordinary process of renewal. Their narratives are a true Renaissance tale. To continue our story, I'm joined by Daniel L. Ritchie, University of Denver's Chancellor Emeritus. Dan served as Chancellor of the university for some 16 years, from 1989 to 2005. Dan, welcome back to DU's Oral History. In the first part of our interview, we talked about the significant role that education played in your early life and about your successful business career. We also discussed how you came to become part of the DU board and the very challenging financial conditions that you found. Those difficult issues ultimately led your colleagues on the board to ask you to become the Chancellor of the University of Denver. In part one of our interview, you described the steps taken by yourself and others at the university, which ultimately led to a dramatic financial turnaround. That, coupled with your legendary fundraising ability, provided the foundation for a physical and academic renewal, which we've called the DU Renaissance. There's much more to cover, and we'll do that. But first, I'd like to take a step back. I think our viewers would like to know how you ever discovered Colorado in the first place.
By chance is the short answer. There were really two pieces to it, I guess. The first, when I was a freshman in college, two classmates and I drove out from Cambridge without an overnight. We just took turns driving to go skiing at Aspen. That would be the winter of 50-51, when the chairlift at Aspen was virtually brand new. I had never seen a chairlift before, and not many others had either, apparently, because they maybe filled 1 in 10 chairs is when it was a single chair, and they put a blanket around you, thinkable today. And I was frankly scared because you looked down and you thought, oh my gosh, there's this thing. But anyway, we had a wonderful time. And the skiing was so much better than New Hampshire and Vermont that I won't forget what it was like to this day. But then having that experience in my junior year, I took an economics class under a professor by the name of John Kenneth Galbraith, who was a very liberal economist who thought the Soviet Union almost got it right. Central planning was the way to go. With just a few tweaks, it would have been fine. And I had a terrible time in that class because even then I was not in the same place in economics as he was by any means. And we had arguments in class that I always lost, of course. I barely passed the course. And I decided after that I was going to get serious about economics. I didn't think I could ever stand up to him, but I could give him a fit for a while. And so what I thought I would do is to spend the next summer studying economics, reading the early folks, the John Adams and Keynes and so on. And so I thought, why not Colorado? So I wrote Boulder, the University of Colorado at Boulder, and asked if I could come out and use their stacks to do that. I didn't want to take another course. And they wrote back a very nice note saying, sure, come on out. We'll give you a pass to the stacks, and we'll find you a place to stay. Oh, this is such nice people. And anyway, I spent the summer, had a wonderful time, climbed Long's Peak on a weekend, and we saw only one other couple. and which has changed a bit since that time. But the main thing that it told me was how nice the people were. Everybody was so nice to me. They'd never seen me before. They didn't ask, how rich are you, or poor are you, or who are your parents. It was a wonderful experience, and that's what really convinced me that Colorado is the best place on earth.
Well, Colorado and the University of Denver are both lucky that you fell in love with our beautiful place. Let me turn, if I may, to continue our story of the events that occurred as you were Chancellor to the matter of athletics. Taking the University of Denver to Division I in sports was a major financial commitment and not without risk. Why did you want or think about DU going to Division I? Can you tell us that story?
There's a lot to the story, actually, but just quickly, actually what triggered this was I went to a women's basketball game in what was then the court, and there may have been 20 people there, and I sat next to a woman who it turns out was the coach to the women's volleyball, I believe, and we began to talk, and I asked her how recruiting was going for the next year, and she said, I don't know. And I thought, uh-oh, we have the wrong coach. But it turns out, as she went on to explain, that being Division II, you really didn't know until all the Division I folks had decided who they wanted, and you could have your choice of what was left. And I thought that's not a very good place to be. But also, so much is about quality. Again, nobody cares whether you're the national champion at Division II, and you can't attract the quality of student. And I really believe that athletics is more important than people generally realize about what it does for young people. It teaches you teamwork, it teaches you commitment, discipline, putting the team before yourself, and I could talk about that for quite a while, but also the health effects both mentally and physically as well. So I really believe that that consistent with our other thoughts about the university, that if you're going to do something, do it as well or better than anybody else does it. And while this, you think, how in the world could you think we'd ever do that? I wasn't sure, but I knew we had to try.
Well, in those days, I remember you and I discussing this. I was the CFO and began to get a glimpse of how much this was going to cost the university. And
that was an afterthought.
And as we were traveling around the country looking at programs,
yes.
I mentally kept adding up the bill and thinking, I hope we can find a way to pay for this. But we did, and it was not just, it was donations, but it was more than that. And there were figures like Joy Burns, for example, who played such a leadership role across many dimensions. You and I often talk about Joy's wonderful contributions. Could
yes.
you talk about that a little bit?
Yes. I think if we had taken a vote among the faculty or the staff, we probably would have lost. But we had some very strong people led by Joy, mm-hmm. who is in the Colorado Sports Hall of Fame because of her support for women's athletics at a time when it was not popular mm-hmm. or not viewed as being, but she had the right idea and she was serious about it. And then we had Bill Coors, who believed in fitness, and that's why we have the Coors Fitness Center, mm-hmm. and Marion Gottesfeld. So between those three, but others as well, the Board of Trustees really was solidly there, recognizing the risk, and they were willing to fill some financial gaps if we had to, if we really got in trouble. So that's really what led us to be able to do what I really wanted to do.
Well, and it's had such an impact on the university. One of the stories that you and I both had a chance to watch was the renewal of DU's ski team. It's hard to imagine that the University of Denver abandoned skiing here in the Rocky Mountains, but we did. But under your guidance and with the leadership of Otto Schutte, could you talk about that? It's a wonderful story.
Yes, because as I said, skiing is something that I liked, appreciated, and I thought was really fundamental to Colorado. I think we have as good or the best skiing I know anything about. And for us not to be intimately involved in that just didn't seem like it was Colorado. But we also, in addition to skiing, we also brought back golf, which had been canceled, and we had some good support for that. We also, after the coach got to retirement age, we canceled baseball because we felt we couldn't be competitive in college baseball, because by the time it gets to be baseball weather in Colorado, the season's about over in college, and that we never could be very good at it, no matter what we did. So that was not the most popular thing I ever did either. But we had a wonderful man who retired, Coach Rose, and we then added lacrosse, which had been here on a club basis for 25 years at that point, but was a great sport that we felt was coming on and that we could really be competitive at it. And so we added lacrosse.
And that's an understatement to say we could be competitive. We have been very competitive.
We won a national championship.
Yeah. Well, that's athletics seems to me to be part of a larger focus you have about the whole matter of wellness in general. Could you share your kind of perspective on that, Dan?
Do you have a little time?
Yeah, sure.
Yes, the history of that is, for me, interesting, and you may want to cut this out of but what happened is that when I was in Hollywood, my best friend there was Eddie Albert, who co-starred with Eva Gabor in Green Acres. He was, at the time, the face of the environmental movement at a time when it wasn't generally accepted as a good idea, because in part it was triggered by DDT and its effect on various things. Right. And so he was very much into that. Also into organic food. We debated, is organic the right name for it? Is there a better name? But we couldn't come up with a better name. But he played a major role in that. And then he introduced me to a holistic doctor, which I didn't know existed, and Dr. Walters, who was viewed by the profession, the medical profession, as being a quack, although he had all the credentials. And they raided his office every few years to see if they could prove it, but they never did. So his introduction to that, as I got into it, began to realize there was so much more that I didn't know and almost nobody did about mental health as well as physical health, and the importance of exercise over your whole life and the other advantages of that, but also what you ate and how you lived and how you thought. It taught me how to do meditation. And so anyway, the combination of all of these things, and Eddie really lived it, and he horrified their neighborhood when he tore out his front yard and planted beans and corn. And so anyway, he set a great example of how to do it and do it right. And his wife, Margot, was the same in the same vein. And she was, by the way, in her young days, really what I would call the Babe Ruth of the flamenco dancers in Mexico.
Really?
And her story is a great story, but that's, I guess, outside of what we should be talking about.
Earlier in our discussion today, and certainly in our discussion, in our first part of the discussion, you talked a number of times about the whole matter of quality.
Yes.
At DU, your focus and that focus has been manifest in our buildings, our magnificent campus, quality of our faculty, our programs, student life, and so much more. Could you, and you and I have talked about this many times, but could you share for our viewers your views on quality and why is it so important?
It starts with why are we here, for goodness sake? We are here to help young people become all they can be. Mm-hmm. And one size does not fit all. It just seldom fits two. And so this to deliver on that is not so easy to do, but we had a faculty who believed in this as well and who really cared, as our board did. And the whole idea of being the best, or at least as good as you can be, is so much more fun. and I think that's what this university should stand for and deliver. And that was really, because that we never forgot. That's why we were here. We're not here to have fun watching whatever. Anyway.
Well, and in that connection, you've also talked about being on the leading edge of things and,
Yes.
and not following, but being on the leading edge, which of course carries risk with it as well.
Yes.
What are your thoughts a little more on that?
Well, I have often said that if you're not on the leading edge, you're taking up too much space. But also, it's much more fun than just, and certainly there's risk. I mean, there's huge risk sometimes. But that's okay. Tell you a story about Eddie. Speaking of this, reminds me, and you may want to cut this out too, I don't know. But anyway, he was in the Navy in World War II in the Pacific, where we had these bloody invasions of island after island by the Marines. And he led one of the landing craft. Mm-hmm. And in one of the particularly bloody situations, he, when he came back to the mother boat, he'd gone through bloody red water with people dying, the Marines. It's a terrible, terrible story. And he went to his commanding officer of the ship and said, "I've got to go back and save some of these people. Some of these Marines." And his CEO said, "No, Eddie, you're not going to do that. You stay here because you'll just die and you'll lose the boat and you'll not do any good." Eddie did it anyway, and he was court-martialed for it, but he saved 15 Marines. And at his funeral, the 5 of those Marines turned up and spoke. I was but that's the kind of risks, to do the really great stuff you've got to take sometime. I never took anything quite like that, but the principle is absolutely the same. You do what it takes to do the best you can, and if that puts your life in danger or your reputation or whatever, you do it, for goodness sake.
One of the things that we haven't yet talked about, but so important, is the DU Board of Trustees in all this? You've alluded to them a couple of times, but I'd like to probe a little deeper. You work intimately with the board, of course, on a wide variety of issues. And as you and I and our viewers know, in any organization, whether it's private, public, or nonprofit, the effectiveness of the board is vital to the success of the operation. I'd love to hear your views about the importance of board relationships and your experience, and in particular, perhaps the DU board and your relationships.
The board, of course, is the governing body of the place, and we had an extraordinary group of people who really cared and who were not subject to being termed out. Marion Gottesfeld, for example, if my memory is right, was on the board 43 years, and she died on the anniversary of the day that she, 43 years earlier, had come on the board. So you had people who were really committed to the place and to the students and to our people. And so we worked by consensus, really. I only recall one vote that was not unanimous, and that was one vote among the whole. I think there were 27 or 8 then at the time, and that was done with apologies. That, as a matter of conscience, it had to do with gay rights, as I recall. It was one member who just felt, from a religious perspective, they couldn't do that. So you had people who were accustomed to discussing it and modifying it as needed, but to finally get to a consensus where, so there was collegiality. As far as I could tell, there wasn't rivalry or people, they disagreed sometimes, as they should have, and criticized me sometimes as they should have, but ultimately we all came together. And again, that set an example for the whole organization, that this was, if those folks could get along that well, the rest of us could too. And it really had a wonderful influence, I think, on how we worked. Because again, when I took the job, not everybody thought I was a good idea, understandably, but they soon, after a while at least, realized that I was not there for me. I was really there for them and the students, so that the original concern I had about being having fights, internecine, if that's the right word, fights, just didn't occur here. We had disagreements, but we came together in a common cause.
And I would underscore for our viewers that board, in spite of the unanimity on votes, involves some of the strongest people I have ever met.
Yes.
I knew them all, and
Yes.
So lest anyone believe that it was because they were not strong people, that would be a
No,
mistake.
they were not yes folks saying whatever. That was not their MO.
One of the things, Dan, that we haven't talked about, but has always been of interest to me, is you came from a CEO capacity in the private sector. That's happened many times where CEOs and business leaders have come to universities, and the track record in terms of their tenure is not sterling. Most last a year or two, maybe 5, but never more. And yet you came to the university with that background. But there was something about what you saw here and about your own perspective that allowed you to succeed so well. What did you think about vis-a-vis your business experience when you joined the university, a very different place than a private corporation?
It is a different place, as it should be. but the principle of how you lead is the same in my view. To do either well, it should be a bottoms-up process. The folks in the front line, whether it's in the classroom or on the athletic field or whatever it is, know more about it than you do, than I did anyway. And they need to be listened to and feel a part of it and know that you're there for them. You're not trying to use them for your own advancement or survival, as the case may be. And it was the same for me all of my business life. That's how I operated, and that is how to operate in my view. And also to set the example of behavior that matches what you want them to be, that it's where you are on a team together and you're there to help one another, and you're there in a shared mission that everybody agrees on what it should be.
Well, it certainly was effective, as many folks would attest. I'd like, if I may, at this point, to again perhaps take a step back, and I'd like to talk about your ranches, because I know they've been a really important part of your life.
Yes.
So perhaps we could start with your ranch in Santa Barbara, California. Perhaps you could describe it and then tell us how you acquired it or how you got it.
It's going to sound like the rest of my life. It's not part of a plan. What happened is that while my first few years at Westinghouse, I was asked to take over a number of businesses they had acquired during the go-go 60s and figure out what to do with them, to develop them, to whatever, or liquidate them or sell them or whatever. And one of the businesses they had acquired was the 7-Up Bottling Company of Southern California, which covered Southern California and Nevada, Southern Nevada, Las Vegas. But they didn't have Ventura, Santa Barbara, or San Luis Obispo counties. And it was owned by the widow of the founder of those for those 3 counties. And but it made all kinds of sense for us. So every so often I would drop by Santa Barbara, which was a nice task, to tell her that if she ever wanted to sell, we wanted to buy. And one time she asked if I would like to go with the man who was the president for her, who belonged to the rancheros there, which were the predecessor and the inspiration really for the Roundup Riders of the Rockies. You went on weekends and longer times on horseback through wilderness. So of course I said, sure. And so we went on a February day. It was in 1976. It turned out to be a beautiful day. It was a full moon, and that we maybe 8 or 10 of us sat around the campfire that night and palm trees. I thought, oh my goodness. And this was February. And one of the people on the ride owned an avocado ranch. And we got talking about what it was like and what the economics of it were and so on. At the end of that discussion, I said, gee, I'd like to own an avocado ranch, but I don't have time to do my homework. And so whereupon the young man that my host had brought along, who'd married his niece, he'd been brought along to take care of the horses, spoke up and said, Mr. Ritchie, I'd just love to do your homework for you. Okay, why not? And he said, give me some parameters, and I'd love to do that. So I told him, it had to have a great view. I didn't want to be down in a hole. It had wanted to overlook the harbor, the Channel Islands, the Pacific.
Pretty tough set of criteria.
Well, there's more. And I said it has to be within 20 minutes of downtown Santa Barbara, and I only have $1 million to spend. In those days, that was a lot of money. And I thought, anyway. And I kind of forgot about it, honestly, till one day I got a call in New York from a young man I didn't know who it was. His name, he said, "Hello, Mr. Ritchie, I'm Terry Hansen." And at first I couldn't remember who Terry Hansen was. And then he spoke, and then I began to remember. He said, "I think I found what you're looking for." And this was almost a year later. And so I said, "Well, it turns out we've made a deal, and I'm going to be at the Biltmore." I gave him the date in February. "And if you'll meet me at sunrise, we'll go look before I go do my due diligence."
Mm-hmm.
I'm not due there till 9 o'clock. So we went, and I was just stunned that it was everything and more that I imagined. And I, as a result of being so awed, because it was actually only 12 minutes from the Biltmore Hotel, and it was all of the things that we talked about. Anyway, I was standing on a 30-foot bank after it had rained the night before, with my mouth open and my eyes bulging, I'm sure, and it gave way beneath me. I fell 30 feet, tore up one leg, ended up in the hospital and on crutches to do my due diligence. But it was love, and we did it, and it was less than $1 million. He asked if he could be the first manager, and I said, "You've done your..." "Sure." But the problem, his wife, however, was not a ranch person. She was a city woman, and she didn't like what it took to be. But what really did it is one night a coyote got her cat, and he called and said, "Dad, I'm sorry, it's leave or divorce." And anyway, that's just a long story.
Well, I've been on that ranch. The views are just breathtaking on the side of the Santa Barbara Mountains.
Oh, and I should have added that I added property over the years. That
Mm-hmm.
was 160 acres, and I ended up with a lot more than that.
Roughly how large was it?
A little over 1,000.
And you had water rights, and it was
Great. And also it was on the bottom of it was 900 feet above sea level. The top was 2,000, and with bigger mountains yet by some margin behind. But it was an inversion area, so that in cold weather, which you get sometime in Santa Barbara, it was like 10 degrees warmer than Santa Barbara, so it was better than I knew.
the perfect place.
Accidental, the whole thing was.
And then there was your Colorado Ranch, the Grand River Ranch,
Yes.
which begins in Kremling, Colorado.
Yes.
I know that ranch as well, and have had pleasure to visit a number of times. You and I have hiked a
Yes.
good part of it, and I know how much it meant to you. That was a major undertaking also. How did you assemble that ranch, and ultimately how large was it?
It started relatively small. My first, it was a piece that was owned by a bankrupt REIT in Georgia. It was the only thing they owned outside of Georgia because they liked to hunt and fish. But they got in trouble, and so I was able to, and it was 6,000 acres. I ended up with just under 100 square miles of deeded ground. That's
100,000 acres.
No, yeah, no.
I'm
let
sorry.
me try again. Well, what I meant to say was it ended up at just under 100 square miles, and which was 62,000 acres. 64,000, I think, is 100 square miles. And it went from the mile and a half frontage on the north side of the Colorado River to through Muddy Pass and into North Park, and so it included almost 5 miles of the Continental Divide that runs east of the Muddy Pass.
And you also had leased land.
There was federal and state land that,
Right.
yes. That was a lot of
so
land,
in
too.
total, was it 100,000 acres or
I
thereabouts?
just don't know. I imagine it was that, and
Yeah.
maybe a little more, but
Yeah.
I don't really know
Yeah.
how
It
much.
was a beautiful place, and I recall, in fact, all of your neighbors used to remark at the fact that when you bought another ranch and added it, that you repaved all the roads, fixed up all the cabins, and they said, how does he do that? And it was just wonderful.
Rebuilt the fences. More
Absolutely.
important.
Absolutely. Well, so you had these two wonderful ranches, one in California and one in Colorado, places, and I know how much you loved them. And then you gave it all away to the University of Denver.
Yes.
It's a legendary story here at the university. What made you do it, and why did you give it all to the University of Denver?
I was going to say I'm not quite sure why I did it. But no, it was needed to do what needed to be done. The ranch in Santa Barbara really paid for much of the engineering and computer science facility, and the Colorado ranch was sold in pieces to do different things that needed to be done. And I had often said that that I would keep the ranches before I would do you until either the sheriff took them or the undertaker. But I was wrong.
Those properties brought the university roughly $100 million, which today would be worth much more. But it was a pivotal point. It inspired others, and it moved the university, as you said, a great way. Finally, I guess, throughout this interview at various points, you've talked about values. You talked about cowboy ethics. You talked about values in a number of ways. I'd be interested in learning more about the values that you've carried through your life, and certainly here at the university, that motivated you, and why they were so important to you.
I guess the one word that I would start with is being trustworthy. The second is being grateful, because as you've heard, I've been really lucky. My father, professor in college, and the ranches were, to some considerable degree, not by pre-planning. So I'm really grateful for what I've been given, and I wonder why all this happened, and I really don't know the answer, but it is out of and love, really, for our people and for the mission of the university, and to set an example personally, but also for the university to set an example for others. In athletics, for example, we don't recruit thinking about the best athlete, but really we recruit thinking about character, because that's what makes a great team. Winning is a side benefit, but the real benefit is teaching young people the values that we have discussed. And that's why I've done what I've done, and that I'm really lucky, and I've enjoyed it, and grateful not only to the folks that I mentioned, but to so many others who've made such a difference for me. So the very least I can do is pass it along.
Well, Chancellor Emeritus Dan Ritchie, I can't thank you enough for your contributions to our oral history, and of course for what you've done for the University of Denver. I hope you'll join us in the future as we continue the story of the University of Denver's remarkable renaissance. I'm Jim Grismer. Thank you for watching.